Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karolina Łukasiewicz, and I'm excited to welcome you in our CMR Migration and City webinar. This time, we have a guest, Asya Pisarevskaya, from the Erasmus University Rotterdam, who will talk about applying qualitative comparative analysis in urban migration studies. So we'll basically try to answer the question how to compare how city manage migration and how to do it using this QCA methodology. Asya research focus on governance practices in European cities. And doing it in a comparative perspective, which is not very common and quite challenging. She received her PhD in sociology and methodology of social research at the University of Milan and Turin. Currently she employs qualitative and quantitative methods to conduct comparative analysis of urban migration, integration, and anti-discrimination governance at local and cross-national level. These methods are in line exemplified by her recent book, co-authored with Peter Scholten, Cities of Migration, Understanding the Diversity of Urban Diversities in Europe. We encourage everyone to check this book out. We'll type it in the chat box. You can download it. It's the Imisko Springer book series, which is all available to download in PDF format. And I'm giving the floor right now to my colleague Marta Pachocka, also from Center of Migration Research Laboratory of Urban Migration Policies, and Marta will introduce our co-organizers.
Thank you, Karolina. Hi, Asya. Welcome, everyone. So, as you know, so CMR webinars are not only about these practicalities of urban and the local level migration governance. This is also about this theory and methodology-oriented meetings. And here we are with a great speaker. And as you know, it's always better to put together the knowledge and expertise from different stakeholders and research units. And this time we have a pleasure to co-organize this event not only as the Laboratory of Urban and Regional Migration Policies of the CMR, but also in cooperation with the IMISCO, one of the IMISCO standing committees, so the one on methodological approaches and tools in migration research, METMIC. And today we have two colleagues from this standing committee, Agata Górny and Agnieszka Radziwinowicz, our colleagues from Center of Migration Research. Another co-organizer is the Research Committee 46 on Migration and Citizenship of the International Political Science Association, that is headed by Jasmine Abulaban, and I'm today representing this body. And finally, we are happy to do this event together with the Polish Sociological Society, the Warsaw Department, that is headed by Grzegorz Całek. So thank you all of our colleagues also for supporting the promotion, dissemination of the event, and then of the follow-up in a form of the recording. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think we can give the floor to Asya.
Hello, thank you, Karolina. Thank you, Marta. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to be today talking to you. I have used QCA for the first time during my PhD, which I finished in 2018. And in recent years, I have been going back to this method. So a few years ago, it was really not known and not used in migration research. So it's really special for me today that we have a webinar dedicated to use of QCA in migration studies, specifically in urban comparisons. So to understand a little bit, what do you know about types of research? I asked Karolina to launch little poll because it's important for me to know your methodological background, first of all. So could you please take 2 minutes, 1 minute to answer 2 questions about it, and that will help me to tailor the talk better to your previous knowledge. Okay, while the poll is running, I think I will share my slides already. Share. Okay. Carolina, could you tell me if it's okay like this?
Yes,
Yeah?
yes, it's perfect, and
Exactly.
we already have some poll results.
Yeah, I see that. Wonderful. So I can see that we have a quite experienced in research community. So 50% are somewhat experienced and 29% are very experienced. That's wonderful. Yeah, and then in terms of methodology, I see that a vast majority are qualitative researchers. Yeah, a few are quantitative, and a little bit more, 18% I'm using mixed methods. Okay, that's good news. Well, any news are good news, actually. So thanks a lot for taking your time to answering this question. I think we could end the poll now, and then I will go on with my talk.
Okay.
So what are we going to talk about today? First of all, I will just briefly introduce the method of qualitative comparative analysis, what it is, and in which cases it's useful, which kind of questions it's useful to answer. And we will talk a little bit more about what actually set-theoretic method means, how does it look, and how does it work. Then I will outline basically the steps that a standard QCA procedure involves. And I will stop a little bit on each of these steps. And then I will dive more deeply into the examples based on my own research to illustrate the application of QCA specifically in the field of urban migration studies. And then at the end, I will recommend you some further readings, some further resources, and journals that may be useful to consider to publish your future QCA paper. So how do I close this? Okay. Next. So let's start. What is QCA? QCA is a set-theoretic method. Let's go step by step. What does it mean? First of all, it's based on theory, but it's not deductive, like in a quantitative sense or positivistic sense. Theory is a strong element of this method because we need theoretical understanding of concepts that we're studying. We need to really be explicit about it and define them really very well. Also, our observations in QCA are cases. So cases of anything, but we need to really explain to the reader or to the public and to ourselves what are they cases of. So which larger phenomena our cases represent. This combination of theoretical definitions and selection of units to analyze the cases, it comprises a set. I will talk a little bit more of what the set means. But for now, you could think about it as an ideal type of certain units, be it cities or neighborhoods, or people, or schools, or organizations. QCA is by nature abductive method. So for QCA, it's really important to not just verify hypotheses, but also to go back and forth between your case knowledge, the empirical knowledge that you have, and theoretical assumptions, theoretical definitions that you start with. So it's an iterative process. It's a dialogue between theory and empirics. And yeah, maybe it doesn't sound like a huge innovation, but let's say, yeah, some methods, for example, qualitative research often uses inductive logic. So we start with kind of observations, we go in depth to understand our cases and then link it to theory. In quantitative research, we go deductively often. First, we analyze what we know about the phenomena, we formulate hypotheses, and then we test them. So in QCA, these processes happen kind of simultaneously. And throughout the research process, researcher goes back and forth. And QCA has been developed by Charles Ragin as a bridge of qualitative and quantitative research approaches. Yeah, his argument was that yeah, there is no clear kind of dichotomy between these two cases. There is a way to bridge these two perspectives and find some common ground. And so he developed QCA as a way to take the best from both approaches. From quantitative, QCA takes a systematic analysis, so systematic, like quite a firm grid of analysis that we apply. It's also replicable, that these are the strengths of quantitative methodology. And from qualitative, it takes an in-depth knowledge of cases that you work with. So the closeness of researcher to cases is an advantage of qualitative in-depth research. And QCA builds on it strongly as well. Yeah, but what is important to understand that QCA is still mostly a qualitative method. Still, it formalizes qualitative material and compares it in a more systematic way. So that's basically in a nutshell how I would like you to understand QCA. So when do we want to use QCA? First of all, when we want to find explanations of why things happened on a case level. So if we take a city, we want to understand why one city has an inclusive pro-migrant policy and which factors contributed to it. And maybe we also want to understand why other cities develop a similar policy and why others not. The case level is very important. So quantitative research often, not often, but let's say in quantitative research, the purpose is to find explanations and correlations at the level of population. And usually that's why we build regression models and we construct measures such as means that don't describe any individual case in particular, but it's like construct of a measure to be able to understand the reality and how it develops over time, for example, or in correlation with other phenomena that we consider factors. Yeah. So in QCA, we're interested in explaining these specific cases. And that's where we come to cities, because yeah, cities usually are complex enough as a cases to really spend a lot of time trying to understand the complex factors that or conditions that led to implementation of certain policy, for example, in a city. QCA is useful to analyze a medium number of cases. What is medium number? Let's say above 10, but below 100. I would say 10 to 50. Oh, hello? Do you still hear me? Yeah. Yeah. Is this okay?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. All is fine.
Okay, good. So medium size of cases. So between 10 to 50, 70 cases. Of course, there is no, there is no like strict criteria. You could also try to do QCA on less cases, less number of cases, but it is really useful when you have this medium number. Why is this useful? Because as a qualitative researcher, when you have more than 10 cases, it's really hard to make sense of all your information, because the information that you have, empirical data, is usually very rich. So it's easy to get lost in this information and make conclusions. So QCA is a useful tool to systematize this richness of data when you have more than 10 cases. And at the same time, let's say quantitative methodology, yeah, there are debates, but I would say it doesn't work that well when you have less than 100 observations. You cannot draw conclusions about correlations very confidently. And also, not all data that you have is quantifiable. Not all characteristics you can really quantify in a meaningful way. But you can categorize it, and that's a difference. So the advantage of QCA is also when we have different sources of data. So basically, sometimes we have indexes or some quantitative measures, GDP or income inequality level, for example. But sometimes our data is content of a policy measure. All right. So, and how do you quantify this? That's usually a very complex question. So you don't quantify it. You just try to make sense of it. So you try to put it in a category. And QCA allows to combine both qualitative and quantitative raw data together into a meaningful comparison. Yeah, and that's why a systematic comparison, if we want to do it properly and systematically, and also convince other people that our way of comparison is not just random, but it has some kind of internal logic to it, then QCA is a good method to try out. And yeah, for QCA, it's really important to know your cases well. So if you have a very big distance to your cases, so you haven't spent enough time researching them, diving them, understanding the mechanics of causality within these cases, it's kind of difficult to make a good QCA argument. It's difficult to interpret the results. So that's why it's good to invest your time in getting acquainted with, for example, cities or organizations that you're analyzing to be able to take the maximum of QCA methodology. So let's move on. So I talked about the sets already. So set-theoretic method, such as QCA, is understood as a collection of well-defined and distinct objects. So cities, neighborhoods, organizations, it could also be people, but it's not so common in QCA to understand it like a set. Set is theoretically grounded, so it's a conceptually defined category. And for people who have never heard of QCA, I use this parallel with an ideal type of Weber. So to me, the easy analogy to understand a set is an ideal type. So it's thickly described definition of a phenomenon, for example, super diverse city. There is an ideal type of super diverse city, and you can find it in literature. Most of them will say it's a New York or London, but then, yeah, some other cities may also be similar. So they could fit into the type or into the set of super diverse cities. So here I give some examples, set of top sportsmen, or set of women with blonde hair, set of global cities or peripheral cities, global north countries is also a set of certain units of our analysis, or our research interest. what is important to remember for QCA that a set always has a direction. So we cannot say a rate of performance of a sportsman as a set, because it's not clear, is it a high or low rate? To define a set properly, we need to say, or we need to think of, for example, a top sportsman. Top performing sportsman is a set, or a high income household is a set. Could also be the low income households if we're interested to explain this set. Yeah, so that is the difference between variables, for example, in the quantitative research. Variables are neutrally defined, and then there is a scale within each variable, high or low income, high or low income neighborhood, or high or low income household. But for a set to make sense and to be able to work with it, we need to know for sure which direction it takes. Yeah. For example, so here is an example of sets, and in QCA we often work with the Venn diagrams. So these circles, overlaying circles, they represent sets. And here let's look at these three parameters or three sets. There is a set of women, there is a set of scientists, and set of people with a university degree that have obtained a university degree. So not all women are scientists, but some are, right? So they overlap on this green field. Some people, well, people have a university degree, but some of them women, some of them men, or other gender. Right, and then not all of these people with university degree are scientists, but to become a scientist, you probably need a university degree. So only when we, all these, let's say sets, they include different number of units, different number of cases. And when we work with sets, for example, to try to explain why some women become scientists or not, we need to combine these sets together. And so only in the middle of these three sets, we would have a new set that says female scientists, for example. Yeah, that's our new set. You could see here the stripes on the letters. The stripe means that it's not the set, so it doesn't include the characteristic or a set that the letter represents. So the yellow circle, it says it's not Q and not C, but A. So A in this case is a scientist, but it's not a woman and not a person with a university degree. And it could be also it's purely theoretical, because you could say, oh, that is not possible to become a scientist without a university degree, but who knows? Yeah. So QCA considers all theoretical possibility of combination of sets that we're interested in. And some of them may be observed and some of them may never be observed. Another important element of QCA that we need to understand is that it operates on the principles of Boolean algebra. So it's a logical rules and operations with these units that we call sets. We also have the conditions. So we don't work with variables, but we work with conditions and outcome. And conditions are usually the theoretical premises or categories that we think contribute to explaining why outcome occurred or not. And we, in the analysis, we specify when the condition is present, it receives a score of 1 in membership in the set of this condition. And when condition is absent, it receives a score of 0. And as I already showed on the previous slide, sometimes absence of certain condition is indicated with this kind of tilde stripe. Sometimes it's indicated as small letters instead of big letters. So the size of letters matters in QCA in the way how you report it. Yeah, so that's a notation that is used to explain the results or to demonstrate the results, not to explain it. I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense. So just to show like the output of QCA analysis and explanation of logical operations on sets, we use these big letters and small letters or tildes to explain if a condition is to show that condition is absent. Then we also have logical operations, so logical AND. So when we combine two sets together, and it must be a woman and it must be a scientist, and that only that overlap constitutes our new set. Then we use this operator AND that is notated as a star. And when we have an or operator, so for example, it can be or woman or man in our set, so we don't care, but it should be a scientist, for example, but or woman or man, then we notate it as a plus. And yeah, then when you see a plus, it's not really the mathematical plus that you're used to. Star doesn't represent multiplication. In Boolean algebra that we use in QCA, it means this and or operators. And yeah, we also combine sets. So when we, for example, interested to understand the interaction of different conditions, we can decide to combine them. And here you could see in the lower part of the slide that if we are interested in AND, a supercondition that combines condition Q and condition C, then we take the minimum value that is assigned to 2 of this condition. And when we're interested in the combination, so we're interested yeah, in either Q leads to a certain outcome or C leads to some outcome, then we take we combine this condition through this OR logic, we call it, and we use a maximum value of either of the two to combine it. So yeah, if you can think of, so Q could be denoted as present, so 1, and C can be absent as 0. And the minimum value of a new set, Q and C, I see there is a typo actually, sorry about that. So Q and C, the meaning or the score that we would assign to this set would be 0, because in one case, Q would be absent. And in the maximum value, so if we were either Q or C, if we're interested in this set, then Q is 0 and C is 1, then we would take a maximum value of 1 to denote that in the new set, Q or C, which is a new set, that this condition is present because one of them is there. That's the logic of sets, how we work with them. But I will show more examples of it, so to understand it better will be easier. Another important element of QCA analysis is this notion of necessary and sufficient conditions. These are very popular words, so we all use them all the time. It's necessary to brush your teeth twice a day to have a healthy smile. Yeah, or yeah, this grade was not sufficient for a pass. But in QCA, these notions have a different meaning. They have a clear logical meaning, and they relate to so how sets of outcome and the condition combine with each other. So necessary condition, we call a condition necessary when it includes cases with an outcome. But there could also be cases that have an outcome but not a condition. So, and that's how we say that Y, so the outcome is a subset of X. And the outcome Y does not occur without the condition X. So we want to understand, this is one of the first things you would want to do in QCA, is to understand which conditions are really must be there so that your outcome you're interested in occurs. And sufficient condition is the case when outcome is a superset of a condition. And condition X always leads to the outcome Y. But there could also be conditions that are present, but the outcome doesn't occur. Maybe because they were not combined with others. And to understand basically the real cause of an event or real combination of these conditions, we need to do both types of analysis, both necessity analysis and sufficiency analysis, and see which conditions appear there as the most meaningful, and then we need to interpret it. So it's not like the software gives us an answer and we take it as it is. No, then we go back to theory and try to explain them again. Here, there are like a simple mock examples of the concept of necessity. So we have a 2x2 table. For example, passing a language test, we have a set of outcome and the opposite of it, so the non-outcome, to fail a language test. And on the X, the condition. You need to practice a lot to pass a language test, or you need to practice a little to pass the language test. And the names are our cases. So we, in our data, observe that Anna practiced a lot and failed a language test nevertheless. But Katarina and Mike, they practiced a little, and they and only Katarina passed the test. So here we could say that practicing a lot is necessary, but insufficient condition. Because oh, sorry, I think I made a mistake here, but okay. So let's then skip it. Yeah. I will confuse you even more if I explain it, if I don't explain it well. So let's, yeah, I'm sorry, something went wrong with my table. But let's move on then to sufficient configurations. So when we know which condition, without which condition our outcome does not occur, so for example, if you haven't practiced a lot, you will never pass a test, then we are good, so we can move on to our sufficiency analysis. And in sufficiency analysis, we are looking for not just meaning of one condition. We want to understand several conditions together, how they combine. Yeah, so here let's look at the condition A, B, C. So first condition is practice every day. Condition B, attended all classes, and condition C, collaborated with peers. And then in the fourth column, we have outcome, so people who passed the test. And you see that every row has a combination of ones and zeros, so that means which conditions and which outcomes are present or absent in every row. And in the last column, cases, you see cases, in our case, people, in this case, people that have a similar combination of, well, the same actually, combination between conditions and the outcome. So in the first, Anna, Mary, and Chris, they have all conditions present and also outcome present. Petra and John have only conditions A and B present and outcome also present. But Danny, Mike, and Pete, they have a different combination. So in the case of Danny, only condition practiced every day is present, and in the other conditions, it's not. And he also didn't pass the test. That's why he has a 0. And then Mike and Pete, they have only condition C, so they only collaborated with peers, but they didn't practice every day and didn't attend classes. Their outcome was also 0. So imagine this is all our data that we have. What can we say here? First of all, the outcome occurs only in the first 2 rows. So only for Anna, Mary, Chris, Petra, and John. And we want to understand why. So what makes a difference there? So that's why we run a minimization process on truth table. And as you can see, the row 1, so when A and B and C are combined, leads to outcome. And the row 2, when A and B, but not C, leads to outcome. So the minimization process will tell us that only a combination of A and B is sufficient condition for an outcome, because C is redundant. If you have cases where this condition was both either absent or present, then it means it's a redundant condition. We don't need it. And so this is the logic, just in very simple terms, how the minimization process works in QCA. And we also take sometimes non-observed combinations of conditions. So imagine like all possible combinations of all conditions and outcome with 1s and 0s, even though we don't have cases that represent such a configuration. So we also sometimes take these hypothetical cases into the minimization process. Well, software does it automatically, but we need to be aware that it can be, we can do it, and why to do it is to account for this unobserved complexity. Yeah, so just to wrap, to kind of summarize the process. First, we need to define the universe of cases. So what are our cases? Are we interested in explaining super diverse cities, global cities, peripheral cities, or municipalities with progressive governments? So we really need to define what is the scope of our analysis. Then, of course, we collect data, and raw data, as I said, can be both qualitative or quantitative on both outcome of our interest. So we want to, for example, understand which cities are proactive in their migration governance and which are not. So that would be outcome. So we need to decide which cities we think have a proactive migration governance and which not. And so for that, we need to do it somehow, right? So we can do it qualitatively by studying policy documents, by conducting interviews, or we could also use an index, for example, MyPaxL, and then try to group our cases as those with a proactive policy towards migrants and those that don't have it. And this process of categorization of the cases is called calibration. So I will show it on an example later. So how to calibrate this? Calibration in simple language is called distinction between or allocation of cases into a set. And assigning these hypothetical 0s and 1s to all conditions that we're interested to analyze and the outcome. Then we look for necessary conditions. And then on step 5, we look at combinations of sufficient conditions. We look at the truth table, we analyze it. And then we run the minimization of this truth table and come up with a model. Yeah, in QCA it's also called model, like in the quantitative research, but don't be scared. So it's just logical formula, so to say, that in a simple way denotes which conditions are sufficient and necessary for to reach a certain outcome. And then at the end, it's really good to analyze the typical cases that really follow this solution path, and also those that don't follow, and try to explain through the lens of theory why this is the case. Yeah, so this is more or less in how the QCA research process looks like. Carolina, what do you think? Do we take questions now, or shall I give an example from a paper right now?
Yeah, I had one question about example of sets. So yeah, I mean, maybe you can answer this, and then if anybody else have any questions, please write them in the chat. So yeah, my question was about the like how do you can you give us the example of sets from your research in migration study? What would be the sets?
Yeah, I think it's useful if I talk about this paper, for example, because I know my sets from that paper very well.
Okay.
So in this paper that you see on the slide, my co-author Gülçe Özdemir and me, we dived into this question: why do some cities support irregular migrants, and why others not? And so our set of interest was cities that have clear signs of proactive and inclusive policies on the local level for irregular migrants. And we looked at 13 European global cities. That was our selection of scope. So we only decided we look at global cities, so capital cities, that's to have some sort of similarity between them. And then we, yeah, I will go further maybe to show you. Yeah, so here, for example, you see a table, and in the last column, MUN-ACT, that's our outcome that we called municipal activism. We coded every case. We assigned it to a set. So, for example, Amsterdam and Barcelona, they are fully in the set of cities that have this inclusive and proactive policies. For example, Rome and Stockholm, we categorized as they are not in that set of cases with municipal activism. So they don't have inclusive or proactive policies to support irregular migrants. Does it clarify?
Can you explain to us the what is lockout, like the acronyms?
Yes, of course. So I went a bit further to answer your question, but let me just take it step by step.
Okay.
So maybe what is important to emphasize once again is that we need to select cases that make sense to compare with each other. People usually say don't compare apples and oranges, but one may argue, well, they're both round, so why not to compare them? But yeah, in application to our field, I would say it wouldn't make sense to compare drastically different city cases or contexts. And yeah, of course, it depends really on your research question, what you consider similar or different. But I would be careful, for example, with comparing cities in different that are located in countries with very different regimes, or with different. So, for example, cities from global south and cities from global north. I think there may be so many different conditions that you cannot observe, or you can observe, but it would be hard to account because of the number of cases and number of conditions, that it might not be the best idea to compare all of them together. So in my research, the one I'm talking about right now, we just chose European cities, and also we define them quite narrowly. They have to be global. They have to be global cities, because we thought that that would create this quite homogeneous sample, you could say, or homogeneous set of cities that we could meaningfully compare with each other. So it's important to remember that when we want to analyze some conditions and whether they predict outcome or not, we choose, we shouldn't choose too many conditions, because your results wouldn't be meaningful if you have, let's say, 5 cases and 9 conditions. It should always be at least a ratio of 3 cases per 1 condition. So the minimum number of cases to analyze 3 conditions would be 9. And that also, of course, for us as researchers is difficult because we want to explain all the conditions. But sometimes it's good to choose also your cases, considering some conditions that you won't analyze, so that you already pre-select quite a controlled sample. Yeah. And it's also important to select cases that have a balanced number of presence of outcome and absence of outcome. Because if you have maybe only 2 observations that have a positive outcome, and then out of 15, and then 13 cases that have a negative outcome, it will be hard to draw conclusions either, because your analysis of positive outcome would only include 2 cases. So it's good to think about these things at the stage of case selection. And then, so once we select the cases, we decide whether they are members of our theoretical sets. And that's where I'm answering your question, Carolina. We have different ways to calibrate, and there are crisp set QCA, so the one that has only scores of 1, so meaning fully in the set, and 0, fully out the set, that are divided by a crossover point. That is a point of maximum ambiguity. And we also have a fuzzy set QCA, where the membership in a set per case varies. And we can assign any score between 0 and 1. And here on the slide, you could see the, let's say, verbal meanings of each score that is used in the QCA. And something in between is the 4-value fuzzy set QCA. So that's when we don't go so much in detail as assigning like 9 different possible scores to our cases, but we only use 4 scores. 1 to describe that a case is fully in a set, 0 to describe that the case is fully out, 0.33 to say that the case is mostly out. So when we are kind of unsure, but it's leaning towards exclusion from the set, and 0.67 when we want to say that the case is mostly out, but still has a difference with those cases that are fully in the set. And on this slide, you see how we calibrated our cases, our 13 global cities, across different conditions and the outcome. And in the, I'm trying to make it smaller. So here the first column is a condition of local autonomy that we analyzed. In the second column, a condition of local economy, then a local diversity level, political discrepancy between local government and national government, presence of local alliances, and then the outcome, municipal activism. So we call it municipal activism when cities show proactive and inclusive policies for irregular migrants. And so then per column, you could see RD means raw data, and CAL means calibrated data. So just to give you an example, for example, local diversity condition, we wanted to distinguish cities that are highly diverse. We took data, quantitative data from Eurostat per this city, and estimated across approximately the rate of immigrant population in these cities in the last 5 years, I think. And then we took a decision, okay, which of these, some of these cities maybe represent really highly diverse city, and we put a threshold for that. And you could see here that we only have 3 cities that we say are fully in the set of highly diverse cities. These are Brussels, Munich, and Vienna. So they all have above 25% of migrant population. And that's why they have a score, calibrated score of 1. And then on the contrary, Budapest with 4.9% of migrant population was calibrated as fully out of the set highly diverse cities. And then the rest of the cases were calibrated as either mostly in or mostly out, with the scores of 0.67 or 0.33. And yeah, so also local economy and local autonomy were based on quantitative source of data. But then political discrepancy and presence of local alliances, this was based on the content analysis of documents and some previous research that my co-author Gülce did. And so she had a very good knowledge of these cases, and that enabled her, well, in consultation with me, of course, to decide which cases we consider as having a strong local alliances between city administration and non-governmental sector, which cities have and which cities don't have that. And the same but for political discrepancy, that was fairly easy to determine, because we just looked at the affiliation of a local administration. So is it more left-leaning or right-leaning? And also the same we did for the national governments of the cities where they are located, of the nation states where the cities are located. And then if we see that there is a difference between the affiliation or political leaning of local level and national level, then we would assign a score of 1. That means the city does have a discrepancy. And when it was not the case, we assign a score 0, meaning that the city had the same political affiliation between the levels of government. So, and yeah, each of these conditions and outcomes, these are sets. Yeah. Carolina, is it all right?
Yes, and actually I have when seeing it, I had a couple of questions too. Like as for the local autonomy, what raw data did you use to measure it?
Yeah, there is a local autonomy index.
Okay.
Yes, and we use that. Yeah, it's not the most ideal variable, but we had no other choice. So, and because we had quite a diversity of countries, it made sense to use it.
And did you have some? Did you yourself did the calibration, or did you have some external experts? Because with index, we sometimes invite like whatever extra specialist from field or.
Yeah, no, we well, we took the index score. We read how it is calculated, and then we looked at the distribution of this score across our cases, and then we took a decision. And I will explain now a bit more how it was taken. So we took a decision ourselves where we draw the boundary between cities that have a strong local economy and those that have don't have it. It's always a bit difficult in QCA. The good practice is not to use means. So that's very important. Many people think, oh yeah, if I have a quantitative data, let's just use above and below the mean. But this doesn't usually give you meaningful results because cases just above and just below the mean are really qualitatively the same. And in QCA, we are interested in difference. What makes actually qualitative difference between those that are in the set and those that are out? And so here it makes sense to just look at the gap, at the biggest gap in your distribution, and cross-check with your theoretical understanding of this condition, and then take a decision. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how it was done. Yeah. And of course, all this information, like how the thresholds were selected, where is the crossover point between in and out, how do you argue? You need to argue this in a QCA paper, and usually the annexes of QCA papers are very long because you need to be transparent and justify your choice.
So how was your annex long for this paper?
I don't know, I think 15 pages.
Oh, okay. That's a lot.
Yeah. So, yeah, let me see. Did I say anything else? Did I forget anything else? Yeah. So what is important also to remember is that our 0.5 crossover point is the point that you don't want to put any cases on. So if you think about this circle, right, the set, so the 0.5 would visually represent something at the border. So it's a case that is neither in nor out. And it's really not helpful for you as an analyst, as a researcher, to have cases that have 0.5 score in either condition or outcome. And I think, yeah, so maybe some people think, oh yeah, we have 3 scores, 0, 1, and 0.5. And it's kind of good to use all of them. That's not the case. It's not recommended to use 0.5 because when you analyze your truth table and you have 0.5s in it, all the cases with 0.5s are getting thrown out of the analysis. So it's nor yes nor no, and you just lose data. And we don't want that. So when you are undecisive, whether you want to assign a set in or out, okay, it's okay in the first stage of calibration to put 0.5s, and then look together with your colleagues, look yourself, think for what makes a difference between these cases and where do they lean mostly, in or out of the set. So here you could see theoretical expectations for this paper. Yeah, I stop here a little bit to show more body behind the theoretically driven part of this method. So we used previous research to make inferences, to make expectations for our paper. And for this paper, it was important also to to make these claims about a combination of conditions. So not all expectations have to be about combination of conditions. So for example, expectation 1, alliance building between local government and local civil society organizations aids municipal activism. This expectation has only one condition, the local alliances. Yeah, so that's also fine to have it. And we use literature to kind of infer that from it. But then the expectation 2, for example, includes a claim about a combination of conditions. So we say we expect that combination of political discrepancy and collaboration with local civil society facilitates a municipal activism. And yeah, we also have theoretical reasons based on previous research why we think so. Yeah, I will skip the rest of the expectations, otherwise we run out of time. But this is important in QCA analysis. So if you want to do QCA for your case comparison, it's good to really study your literature and note down what does it tell you, which kind of expectations you could derive, not just on individual conditions, but how combination of conditions could influence your outcome of interest. Yeah, so this is a table showing necessity analysis. So here we define a necessary condition. I use R for this, RStudio software. And these are abbreviations. Yeah, well, we saw them already in the table before. So first one is the local alliances. Second one is political discrepancy. And the third one is with this star in between. I hope you remember that it means and. It's a logical and. So this software tells us that actually presence of both of them together is important, is a necessary condition. So without combination of these two, no municipal activism occurs in our cases. And so in the beginning of the table, you see that they individually are shown, and then the third one is a combination of the two. And how do we know it's a necessary condition? Because our inclusion cutoff is 1. So the higher this cutoff, the better it is. In QCA, we usually take 0.9 as a cutoff point to determine necessary conditions. And then RON means relevance. So how many cases are covered by this combination of necessary conditions? 0.9 means almost all are covered. And then yeah, and then the rest, you would ask me, okay, so what are the rest? We could see that below our green conditions, we see a combination. We see or element in it, so it's a plus. It means either local autonomy or local economy. And in good practice of QCA, it is not really meaningful. So these or combinations, they don't really say as much about the necessity. That's why we usually ignore them from our conclusions. And then below, you could see also that necessary analysis for negative outcome. That's also a good practice of QCA, that you not only check how your outcome of interest is explained, so the municipal activism in this case, but also how cases that don't have municipal activism are explained. Yeah, and we can really we can take this as a meaningful information for our further analysis. So let's go on. This is also typical for QCA paper to show an XY plot. This has nothing to do with the quantitative regression, so don't get confused. On X and Y axis, we see these fuzzy score membership scores from 0 out of the set to 1 fully in the set, and everything in between. In the X axis, you see local alliances, so the condition that we found was necessary. And on Y axis, you see the outcome, municipal activism. So the cases that exhibit both the local alliances and municipal activism are in the upper right corner: Munich, Berlin, Amsterdam, Barcelona, and Milan. And we see that also there is a certain difference between Berlin, Munich, and Amsterdam and Barcelona, because we calibrated them as mostly in the set, but they're still a bit less municipally activist compared to Amsterdam and Barcelona. And that's also, we see it on this graph. And then these cases that have a negative outcome are in the corner, lower left corner. Yeah. So that shows basically the same result as the table, just that I demonstrated, but for one condition. And yeah, it's a visual format. I could have also shown here a combination of local alliances and political discrepancy. And yeah, the plot would have been similar because they are both necessary conditions. Yeah, here we could see a more simplified version of the set. So that's a 2x2 table. And we see here clearly which cases have both local alliance and political discrepancy in the upper right corner, and those that don't have it. Then sufficiency analysis truth table. So that's, again, what I showed you in a more like a mock form with the studying practice of different people. Right here, we talk about the cities, so something more close to our research area. And yeah, as in any truth table, we see in the first several columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. So from local AL to local div, local diversity, we see the conditions and scores of whether they're present or absent. And then the last, the column out is the outcome. And then we also see which cases share configuration or combination of conditions and outcome, and which cases don't. So for example, Berlin, Milan, and Vienna, they share a combination of conditions and outcome together. So they have the same combination. But then Amsterdam and Barcelona, they have a different combination of conditions and outcome. That's why they are in the different rows. Yeah, so this is, to study the truth table is it's really important. Also, even before minimization process. So just good to understand how do your cases group across different combinations of conditions. And the good question here is, why isn't there 0.33 and 0.67 like in the table of calibration that I showed you? The answer is truth table does not care if it's 0, 67 or 1. It simplifies this nuance and puts the cases that are above 0.5 as 1 and those that are below 0.5 threshold as 0. And that's why some QCA researchers that use QCA a lot, they say that actually fuzzy set doesn't matter, because at the stage of truth table, you only care about zeros and ones. But qualitative, the researchers that follow more qualitative tradition, that really care about nuance, they often prefer using fuzzy sets either full value or many value fuzzy sets, because it makes them more comfortable that they can show that there is a qualitative difference between, say, Berlin and Barcelona. So some researchers find it really important to demonstrate that there is a difference, to remember it for yourself and also use it in the interpretation of findings. Okay, is there any question about this?
I don't see any questions about this. Yeah, we
have previous question,
yes,
but
yes.
the one that should be addressed during the final Q&A session.
The final Q&A, okay. So then I can go on. So what happens after we minimize this truth table? We get, just for the record, it's important to understand it's actually two truth tables combined for the purposes of publication. In the analysis, we do one truth table for positive outcome and one truth table for negative outcome. But here on the slide, you see both because I just copy pasted it from our paper and it was for the sake of simplicity shown together. And here you see the minimization also of table for municipal activism and table for absence of it. So in the first two rows, you could see that a combination of local alliances, political discrepancy, local autonomy, and local diversity lead to municipal activism in case of Barcelona, Berlin, Milan, and Vienna. And in the second row, it's the same condition, except instead of local autonomy, there is a strong local economy present. And this path explains Amsterdam, Berlin, Milan, and Vienna. As you can see, by looking at the cases, there are three cities, Berlin, Milan, and Vienna, that are shared across these pathways. And they also share a local alliance, political discrepancy, and local diversity. So all these pathways share these three components. So that gives us information that they together are very important enablers of municipal activism for irregular migrants. And then, but they still need to be combined with yet another condition, local autonomy or local economy. And well, in the case of, so I will show you next slide how it actually visually looks. So on the right side, you see this path to solution, so path to outcome of municipal activism that consists of strong local alliances, political discrepancy, local diversity, and local economy. And that explains all these cases in the upper right corner, except of Barcelona, because Barcelona does not have was not calibrated as having a strong local economy. And in the left side of the slide, you could see that local alliance, political discrepancy, and high local diversity in combination with local autonomy explain Barcelona and then all other cities that are also on the right side, but not Amsterdam. Because in our calibration process, Amsterdam was not included in the set of highly autonomous cities. And well, critics of QCA could say, well, it's an arbitrary decision. Yeah, that's one of the main kind of critiques that QCA researchers can encounter. But on the other hand, we are transparent about that, what happened and why that happened. And yeah, you could argue that maybe it would have been better to include Barcelona as a strong economy. But if you compare all the other cases, it was not possible for us to conclude it, to really assign Barcelona into that set of strong global cities with strong economy. compared to all the others, of course. If you take maybe another smaller city, that would still be strong, right? So that's why the calibration process has to be very transparently explained, so that even though some people disagree with your choice of threshold, yeah, you could still agree on what you're talking about, and you can be just transparent about your decision. Yeah, so what is important to conclude, I'm not gonna say like everything about this paper, otherwise we run out of time. But what's really important as a takeaway from this slide is that different configurations of conditions may lead to the same outcome. So you see that these configurations are different by one component, and they lead still to municipal activism. And we can argue that based on theory. That is the principle of equifinality. So that is also some premise that QCA adopts, that it's possible that different combinations of conditions in different cases lead to the same outcome. So it worked in the case of Barcelona to have a combination of local autonomy with all the other important characteristics. But in case of Amsterdam, their policy of municipal activism can be explained, even though you don't have local autonomy, if you have local economy, you can still, and all their other conditions, you could still probably pursue an activist policies towards irregular migrants. This is what it tells us. And that's perfectly fine, because we're interested in explanation at the case level. So these are the cases of our interest, and we want to understand what is happening there. So in this case, equifinality is perfectly fine. And also, it's important to remember that it's not guaranteed that the presence of your conditions for positive outcome would automatically mean that absence of this condition will lead to absence of outcome. Maybe the absence of outcome is explained by completely different configurations. And that is the principle of asymmetry that we also adopt in QCA. And that's why if I go back, you see that to explain cases with absence of municipal activism, we have 4 different paths of conditions. So it's not just automatically something that is contrary to the positive paths. They are more diverse. And that's also, it's not an error, it's just it just shows the complexity of causality and the complexity of reality that we try to capture through this method in QCA. Yeah, and well, causality in QCA is understood not as a correlation, but a co-occurrence of theoretically relevant explanations, explanatory conditions, and outcomes. And these Boolean expressions, so these formulas that I just showed you here, they are not actually, like, we cannot just simply take them as a causal claim. The causal claim comes when we interpret our empirical evidence through theory based on this formula. So formula just shows us a simplified snapshot. And then it's our job as a researcher to go back to our cases and demonstrate to ourselves and to the reader of the paper, how do we actually observe this happening? What are the qualitative mechanisms at play in cases that show a positive outcome or negative outcome? And that's why this dialogue of theory and empirics is very crucial in all QCA papers. And the explanation that we find is, of course, not the truth set in stone, but it's just simply a plausible causal relation that we systematically argued about. Yeah. So well, were our expectations verified? You can read in the paper, and I won't stop here too much. But yeah. So I still have some information about my book, but I don't know if we still have time about it to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it would be great to learn more of the book. I mean, you can maybe more highlight here the examples that you used for cities of migration, and then the method itself.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the Cities of Migration, that's a recently published book. I wrote it together with Peter Scholten. And in this book, we used QCA a little bit less traditionally, more. We used it as a tool to develop a typology, and not really to find a causal claim. Yeah, so the paper I just showed you, this would be like a traditional application of QCA. A lot of papers look like this. They start with the question why, and they answer this question, right? In our Cities of Migration book, the purpose was to define which configurations of different characteristics there are in different types of cities, and try to explain a little bit how maybe they come about. So we started with a theoretical exploration of possible conditions that we need to analyze and include. Then we studied also quantitatively a variety of cities to select cities that are distinct in key characteristics, for example, diversity and segregation levels. And we selected cities that are also similar, somehow similar. So we wanted to have both combination of similarity between cases within different types and difference. I will show you how it looks later. So that was quantitative part. And then after we selected 16 cities, we dived into an in-depth analysis using desk research and qualitative interviews. And we tried to produce a rich description of each case. And then QCA was applied to systematize this comparison, really. So to just try to put cities into these conceptual sets that matter based on theory. And yeah, try to see, okay, how do all these factors and conditions coincide together? Can we argue that there are some cities that where conditions overlap in such a way that they form a type that is distinct from other types? So that was our intention with this book. And yeah, then we interpreted the findings. So yeah, I'll skip this, but we used some harmonized data sets to map the cities across dimensions of segregation level between migrants and non-migrants. And we calculated Simpson diversity index to measure the extent of migration-related diversity. And then we wanted to select cities from different countries per each quadrant that are kind of the most typical. In some cases, it was difficult because, for example, in the higher right corner, there were no cities in the center. There weren't French cities or Italian cities in the middle of it. So we had to select those that were just on this mean line for the sake of having all 4 countries in it represented. And yeah, so here we mapped the cities, how they, across different variables, how they compare, how they differ. This is just a raw data, so this is not a calibration, just for the record. We defined the 4 clusters, you could say, yeah, stats, just for the sake of systematic comparison of them. So we define high diversity, low segregation cities, high diversity, high segregation cities, low diversity, high segregation cities, and low diversity and low segregation cities. And then we dived into our in-depth analysis, which was during COVID. And that's why we didn't really visit the cities, which was very pity. But we tried our best to compensate this through expert interviews and desk research. So then, after we have conducted this data collection, we tried to, and wrote down the qualitative chapters of the book. We tried to systematize this information using fuzzy set QCA. We defined a number of theoretically driven sets. For example, we had a group of mobility factors or mobility conditions, so to say, long history of migration in the city, high variety of migration flows, so that means like different types of migrants come there in the cities, and how intense is the mobility in and out of each city. Then some inequality factors, so for example, state of economy, strong is a strong economic stance, and broad sector of industry was important for us to check if it makes any influence on our outcome. And yeah, then income disadvantage of migrant groups was also kind of estimated. It was really difficult because not all cities have comparably good data. But yeah, we tried our best to give a fair assessment and fair allocation to a set of, okay, those cities that have most likely have a very high inequality between migrants and non-migrants, and those that have a moderate inequality or a little inequality. And then we also, and then we also assessed political institutional factors, so type of migration governance policy. We try to categorize that different way, like universalist policy or interculturalist policy, integrationist, and we also try to see whether the local government shows leadership and vision for migration policy, yes or no, and whether there are strong initiatives from civil society present. So that's bot-pole, bottom-up policies condition. So these were
just a quick question about this. Yeah. Just a quick question about this 3 sets. So the
these
are there 3 sets, or this is like much more sets? No.
there are much more sets. Yeah.
Okay.
So the 3 categories you see here is like, yeah, just theoretical groups of sets. But each city was rated on the individual set, like long history was 1 set, for example. Yeah, and then we combined some of them. For example, first we just assessed like substantial inflow of immigrants and substantial outflow. That was 2 different sets. But then we looked at our data and we said, okay, it actually doesn't really tell us much. Let's create a new superset that shows that defines cities with both high inflow and high outflow, and then separates them from all the rest. That's why this mobility set appeared, superset, high mobility. So here, just it's couple of sets, so not all of them, but couple of them with calibration in it. So strong and diversified economy. So for example, city Cosenza was allocated as a mostly out of the set, but then a city like Constance was considered as fully in the set of strong and diversified economy. Rotterdam as well. And then, for example, Rouen in France was mostly out of the set. And then smaller cities like Vannes and Viareggio, they were considered fully out of the set. So we proceeded with this kind of systematic, it was a systematization of qualitative information, really. This is what QCA is all about. And we both of us, Peter and I, we looked at the cases. He was mostly involved in analysis of French and Dutch cities, and I studied mostly German and Italian. And then we had like several sessions of dialogue, just really deciding how are we going to allocate these scores, which cities per each set we can say confidently that they, belong to this set or they do not belong. And we also had some cases with where we were not sure. So we we had to go back to our material, study it again, and then take a decision. So that's demonstrates the process of iteration between your analysis and your empirical data, and refining also your theoretical understanding. What do you actually try to capture on a conceptual level with this set? So that was always, it was a process, very qualitative process of taking.
Just to clarify, in this
Yeah.
table, the rows are separate sets?
The rows, no, the rows are cities, and the columns are separate sets. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So this is true from the previous table to this one. You get through multiple iteration to finally clarify it that way. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you also don't see some columns here because it's just too much to show. But in the book, we have tables with full sets, with full number of sets. Yeah. So, do I still have time to show how we made sense of it?
Yeah, I think so. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So then we constructed, because we had so many conditions, so many sets, and we had only 16 cases, we could not really do traditional approach to QCA, because that would have required us to really take a decision which conditions we are analyzing and stop there. But we didn't want to do it because we thought we want to know which conditions actually matter out of all this variety. And yeah, that's why we started analyzing by groups of sets. So for example, mobility factors were analyzed in one QCA analysis. So I ran necessity and sufficiency analysis just for long history, flow, var, and mob sets. And then the outcome, which was, I did it separately for highly diverse cities and those that with low diversity, and highly segregated cities and those with low segregation. So that enabled us to kind of find out which conditions coincide with which outcome. So outcome in our case was either diversity or segregation. And well, in the annex of the book, you can find these tables where you see that, for example, long history was found to be a necessary condition for cities with high diversity. We see the inclusion cutoff is 0.917. So that's it's enough to judge that this condition is necessary. And then, yeah, table 2, you see also some other combinations that are linked with this logical operator or, but as I said earlier, they are not really informative for us. So we don't take conditions, combination of necessary conditions combined with or operator, even though they appear in an analysis. Then this is just a small example of sufficiency analysis, also just mobility factors or mobility conditions as it's written here. In the table A5, you see long history, mobility, so high mobility and diverse flows of migration, and outcome, whether cities have high or high diversity. And then we see cases that fit in this combination. So Hilversum, Ingolstadt, Constance, Paris, and Rotterdam all share presence of these 3 conditions. And they also share the outcome. They're all considered highly diverse in our analysis. And then on the contrary, for example, city like Doetinchem, Roanne, and Van, they exhibit only long history of migration, but they are not considered highly mobile, and they are not considered having very diverse immigration flows, different types of migrants in the cities. So based on this table, we minimize it, and then we see that the result you could see in table A6. It's a complex solution, so the one that doesn't include unobserved cases. So it doesn't include unobserved configurations. It only takes the truth table with observed cases. And it concludes that both long history and diversity of migration flows are sufficient conditions for highly diverse cities. And then if we include possible unobserved combinations of conditions, then we arrive to only one variable, flow var. So that is diverse migration flows that is considered sufficient condition for high diversity. But it's good to show in QCA both a complex solution, intermediate solution, and parsimonious solution. In this analysis, I was not really comfortable to rely on a parsimonious solution. I wasn't sure, there was not enough cases, so I decided just let's go for a complex solution, just make conclusions of the observed cases without any assumptions, without any expectations. And this is another example on how we did it for inequality conditions. Same principle. The conclusion from this analysis was that there are two pathways that kind of correspond to cities with high diversity, cities that have strong economy, strong evidence of discrimination between migrants, and strong migrant disadvantage. They are also cities with high diversity, so it's kind of hard to say, okay, causal claim, maybe not, but still it shows us they coincide. Yeah, and that is the case for Ingolstadt, Modena, Paris, Parma, and Rotterdam. And then the second solution is just strong economy, but then less inequality and less discrimination is shown in the cities of Constance and Hilversum. So when we look at which cities come together in this analysis of configurations, we can make we can understand, okay, they come together, so there must be something that they share together. And the sufficiency analysis shows us what it is, which factors coincide in these cities. And that's how we, step by step, we ran a lot of analysis, also those that not just by cluster, like conditions of inequality, but also combining the conditions that emerged as the most important from all these previous stages. We combine them also at the end and run yet another set of analyses to really come to sort of a typology definition. And this is our preliminary, well, this is what we defend in our book. But of course, I think that maybe with more data, we could refine it even further. But our conclusion here was that there are 5 types, that we could argue about 5 types of cities. We call them super diverse cities, post-industrial migration cities, middle-class diverse cities, divided cities, and marginal migration cities. And we argue that they form types because these cities that are in the circles exhibit a number of shared conditions together. And they also find their space in this visualization of diversity and segregation. For example, we could say that, post-industrial migration cities, there are those that have long history and variety of migration inflows. They have a strong economy, and they're also highly diverse, and they're also highly segregated and highly unequal. And that's what defines the cities like Rotterdam, Ingolstadt, Modena, and Nîmes. And then on the contrary, maybe Hilversum and Constance, we call the middle-class diverse cities. Why is that? Because they're also diverse, like highly diverse. They have strong economy. They also have quite a long history and variety of migration inflows. but the differences between the type of migrants that the city have and local population are not as drastic, and the migrant residents are also spread more evenly across the cities in comparison to post-industrial migration cities, for example. So, and yeah, we were able to arrive to these types thanks to both quantitative mapping, qualitative in-depth studies, and the systematization of both data sources through QCA. So I think I would stop here, if you don't mind, and I will take questions.
So Asya, thank you very much for this, let's say, a lecture and workshop type of contribution to today's CMR webinar. The good message is that almost all the people that joined us in the beginning are still here. So it means that really it's something new, it's something inspiring and also clearly explained based on your cases and work. And I would like to move to the question that we had in our chat during your presentation by Orsolia. So Orsolia asks, Asya also mentioned organizations as an example of sets, I believe, unless I misunderstood it. Could you mention could you mention an example of using QCA when analyzing organizations in the context of migration?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So I don't know any paper, but that's probably just because of me, that analyzes organizations in through QCA in migration studies. But maybe there is. But I know that actually QCA is super popular method in organizational studies. So it's the whole field of research. It's related to management and administration, business administration. So they study companies and they run QCA on companies like all the time. This is the standard unit of analysis. Yeah, I would recommend you to go to Compass website. Oh yeah, this is something I forgot to say. Further sources. So I will show it in a moment. So there is a website with collection of QCA papers. And so if you're interested to have an example of a paper that looks into organizations specifically, and you just search with the key terms there, and you'll find a lot of papers. And yeah, what I could think of, let's say, what organization, maybe you want to compare NGOs, and then you, for example, want to know which type of NGOs are most successful in acquiring funds from, for example, national government. So then you need to theoretically define characteristics that maybe matter, why some are successful and others not. And yeah, I don't know what are those characteristics, but let's say size, let's say experience in the field, and yeah, let's say participation in conferences of NGO actors. 3 factors randomly assigned. Well, factors, we could call them conditions, right? And then you could run a QCA by gathering qualitative data or quantitative data on all these conditions and the outcome, let's say successful funding acquisition as an outcome, positive outcome. And then you could see which conditions matter. So that would be out of my head example of research that matters for migration field, and that includes organizations as cases.
Thank you so much, Asya. Do we have any other comments and questions from our participants? Maybe someone would like to jump in with camera and micro to ask something, share his or her experience. That's the moment.
Hi.
Yeah, so we see, hi, please.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi, Asya. Great to see you. For the others, I'm a PhD student, and I'm also researching cities and migration. And I was always curious about QCA. I knew nothing about it, so it's been a great presentation, and I've learned a lot. Thank you so much for sharing. And I don't really have a question, it's more a comment on how your presentation clarified that we also need to be very clear on the cases and on the outcome that we want to investigate, because for my own research, I'm studying a city network in Europe, and I have about 30 member cities of this city network that filled out a survey. And I was like, maybe I could use QCA for analyzing these cities. But actually, my real object is the city network, and it's a single case, no? So,
Yeah.
So yeah, it also helped me clarify that, okay, no, my case is the city network, not the cities that are part of this network. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that this presentation was useful for you, Juliana. Nice to see you too. And yeah, of course, it's very important to be clear on what you're studying and why. And if you, for example, you could think of, I don't know if it's your study or not, but why some cities join networks and others don't. That's a good question for QCA.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, but then you would consider both cities that are members of X network and those that are not, and then try to see what are shared conditions that cities that are part of the network show and those that are outside. But then, of course, yeah, you would also have an issue of, okay, how similar or different all these cities are.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's okay. Like if you're all in Europe, for example, that's fine for QCA.
Yeah, maybe for future research.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Maybe we can encourage some of our colleagues specializing in research methods to comment or even try to criticize, just to have a kind of discussion with what we've presented. If not, I will have one, I think, final question based on your project-related experience and publications, some of publications you've mentioned. So how do you see how the evaluators or reviewers assess, comment, refer to your methodological framework? So when you receive any project evaluations or paper reviews, how they approach this? So they say it's great, it's innovative, or maybe no, it's not so typical, traditional, and it's too risky. If you can comment on it briefly.
Yeah. So I think for the papers, it's a bit easier for me to answer because yeah, I have a little bit experience in that. Usually, you have two types of reviewers. You have reviewers that are knowledgeable in QCA, and then you have to explain less, like about this method, but you need to justify more because they would be more kind of critical of the choices you made. They will ask you questions that you maybe haven't thought of even. And then you would have to, but it usually helps because you can, maybe they will notice a mistake actually, and then you could just rerun your analysis and then your paper will be better. The problematic reviewers are those that have never heard of QCA and think it's illegitimate method with a lot of arbitrary choices. So then as an author, you'd have a harder time convincing them that it's a legitimate method. And yeah, sometimes editor is the one who will decide then. Because so it's important to address also critique of those who don't know the method and doubt your conclusions. You need to respond to it adequately. You need to refer to methodological literature of best practices in QCA to justify your choices and show that your choices are consistent with best practice, right? And then you also can agree on maybe have a less strong causal claims in the way how you write about your results. So to really emphasize the plausibility of these conclusions rather than, yes, a matter of fact. And I think it's also honest. And then usually reviewers, even those who are skeptical, they accept it. Yeah, and then the editor would judge like, okay, so this person uses an unconventional method, but is following the guidelines and explains all the process that was done there. So yeah, as an editor, do I want this method to be in my journal, yes or no? And it can be like an arbiter, to say it, like this judge between the reviewer's critique and your quality of your research, basically.
Thank you. Very helpful comments in both cases. So as
I have one very quick one, last question to you.
I'm giving you the floor now.
Okay. So in the first paper that you presented, you framed the cities as they are all global cities, but I mean they were quite different. I'm thinking about Budapest and Amsterdam, for instance, and frankly, when I think about Amsterdam, I would see quite a lot of similarities or more similarities to, I don't know, New York than the Central Eastern European cities. So I'm wondering, like, how far would you go with this similar different? Like, would do you think it would still make sense to, if it's theoretically also driven, to include some, I don't know, North American cities in such a comparison? Or would you say that because of, I don't know, income inequality, they're so different that it's just breaks the comparison?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Carolina. I mean, really, yeah, you're right to say that Budapest and Amsterdam are maybe different in many ways, but they are all capitals of European nation states. They are both within the EU. So there are certain political forces that shape their behavior as a city, as actors, right? And in the way they respond to irregular migrants. Even though Budapest is less diverse than Amsterdam, that's for sure, and also has less history of migration, perhaps. Still, to answer this question, we argued that capitals matter, and also in some cases, second biggest city, I think, if I'm not mistaken, was like, for example, Barcelona. Yeah, is not a capital of Spain. But it's a very important city in this country, so it made sense to include it in our set. So it's a lot about how do you explain the inclusion criteria. And I wouldn't include so easily North American cities because I think that system in the USA, the political system and the way the local governance is organized and the federal governance is organized is maybe too different from the European Union. So yeah, I don't know, we could try, but I would expect a lot of different pathways that would distinguish North American cities and their response to regular migrants and European ones.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I think, Carolina, that here we can close because it's 4 p.m. Friday afternoon. So according to CMR webinars, we do not take more than 2 hours per meeting. So Asya, once again, thank you very much for having time in mid-December for us to contribute with your research-based experience about this methodological workshop. It was very helpful. The recording will be shared with any colleagues that are interested on our YouTube channel. So we see that our participants saying thank you. So it means that it was a piece of good work, we can say, and we are sure that it's not the last time we do something together. We will start with new ideas in 2025. In Poland, we are just close to the so-called academic evaluation. So let's hope that there will be other occasions to meet, maybe with a different format, more discussion-oriented. And yeah, for sure you will be one of our top listed participant. Thank you so much.
And we already have one event actually scheduled if anyone is coming to UMISCO conference this year. So we will have a panel where
we are planning to have, still waiting for the approval. Yeah, so
we hope to have a panel where,
local level
among others, this
governance.
book will be presented. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for listening to my sometimes confusing explanations. So apologies for that. But I think I would like to share a presentation with the attendees, if that's possible.
Yeah.
Because I didn't manage to show slides with further readings and the website that is really important for those who want to try out the QCA. So you will get it as a presentation later.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We wish all a nice weekend. For
Have
sure,
a good
busy.
weekend,
Thank you.
everybody. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.